So David G and I would like to speak a little tonight because, as you had heard, we're going to release the Autobiography of a Yogi in India. And this is the first release of many translations of the Autobiography of the Yogi in the various languages. So there are, I think, 5 or 6 other languages being prepared now. It's a very great opportunity to have this book available in the language in which people feel most comfortable, because this is a book. I've never known any book personally, nor have I ever read about a book that has literally changed so many lives. That's why this really is a kind of a scripture, and that sense of it being a scripture and coming into the world with a particular spiritual purpose. Last year was the 70th anniversary of the release of the book. It was written and then finally published in 1946. And so last year was the 70th anniversary. From the time of its publishing until 70 years later, it really changed the world. It changed the consciousness. At the time Yogananda Ji came to America, it was in 1920. So he taught in America for 26 years before the release of the Autobiography of a Yogi. Many of you know that he went on what he called his spiritual campaigns. So he would go to the biggest cities in America, and he would stay in that city for perhaps a month or 6 weeks, and every single night he would give a class, sometimes 2 classes, sometimes 3 classes a day. And in the other times, he would meet with businessmen, he would meet with dignitaries, and so on. So he said that he was churning the ether to change the consciousness of the West, which was the mission that God had given him. All of this was done. He had spoken to thousands and thousands of people, and he had trained hundreds of thousands of people in the science of meditation. All of this was done before the autobiography was published. But the autobiography was published within almost the last 5 years before Yogananda's passing. And so that autobiography has carried on the mission that he began with his lectures and with his spiritual power. Because one time Swami Kriyananda, when he was very new, Yogananda asked him, "How did you like the Autobiography of a Yogi?" And Swami Kriyananda was overwhelmed by the book. It changed his life, literally. When he read that book, it answered the questions of his heart. And within a day after finishing that book, he got on a bus and moved from New York City to Los Angeles to become Yogananda's disciple. And so Yogananda said, "How did you like my book?" And Swamiji said, "Oh, it was wonderful. It was the greatest book I've ever read." And Yogananda Ji said, "That's because I put my vibrations into it." Now, Swami was very new. He only a week before had ever heard of guru or meditation or these kinds of teachings. He was very new. And so he didn't understand what Master said, what Master meant by the phrase, "I put my vibrations into it." But that's what these great scriptures contain. When you read a book that is by a great master or about a great master, and it has the elements of the master's consciousness in it, those vibrations, more than the words themselves, those vibrations are what change our lives. And so when I read the Autobiography of a Yogi, I mean, the book itself is marvelous. It's got many, I don't know, 50, 60, 100 different miracles in it. Now, why would Yogananda put so many miracles in it? Is it just kind of good advertising? Oh, read this book and it'll be really fun. No, it's because the West especially was and is far too rational. When I read this book for the first time, I was very much kind of a scientific, rational mentality that this is the way the world is. I knew in my heart that it wasn't. I knew in my heart there was something more to consciousness, something more to life, but my mind was not there. So as I began to read that book and see not just miracles, but miracles that Yoganandaji had experienced or that he had done himself. So the authenticity, the vibration of authenticity in that book, combined with the miracles that shattered the limitations of my worldview, my scientific worldview, I could no longer hold on to that narrow, tightly defined, rational world that I thought made up reality. So it broke the edges of my false reality and gave me a picture of something far, far greater. So the vibration of authenticity was there. The vibration of greatness was there. Here was a consciousness that was not just greater than any consciousness that I had ever met, but it was greater than any consciousness that I had ever imagined could exist. The description of going into cosmic consciousness, the poem Samadhi, the various ways that he talked about the law of miracles, the law and the spread of consciousness, and the unity of all things, the unity of all people, the unity of everything under one great consciousness of God. That authenticity and greatness and enormous expansion, again, if it had not had the vibration of Master in it, it would have just been a nice theory. Oh, something clever, but it wouldn't have been able to have the power to change my life. And I could give 10 different examples of Master's vibration and how it personally changed my life. But my life is only one of millions. When Master came to America, almost no one meditated. You could probably number less than 100 people in America who meditated at the time he came. By the time that book has now been published for 70 years, it's changed the consciousness of the world, but first it changed the consciousness of America. Now, the latest statistic I saw was that more than 25 million people in America have a regular practice of meditation. And so you see how he planted those seeds. Why is meditation important? Meditation is important, and this is another aspect of that book, is that you don't just read about God. You don't just have a belief system. You don't just have a priest who delivers a sermon and it doesn't touch your life. But through the practice of meditation, through the practice of the other teachings in there, it leads you to your own personal experience of God and of God's qualities. And so that personal experience is what really changes the consciousness. And so a great scripture comes with the power to uplift the world. And that was Yogananda's mission. That was specifically why Babaji and our line of gurus trained him, why he was incarnated into this world at this time, because he had a mission. This line of gurus has a mission to help uplift the consciousness of the entire world. They're not alone, of course. There are other valid lines, there are other valid teachers. It's really all God's consciousness. They're only aspects, instruments of God, but they're chosen instruments. And Master and the Autobiography represented such a core aspect of that mission. But I think that for me, and probably for others, what the book and the vibration in the book was most powerful was the sense of divine friendship and love. It's filled with humor. You don't get the picture of a yogi up on the mountain saying, all you unworthy sinners down there better shape up or else. There's no of that Old Testament prophet kind of energy in it. It's full of fun, it's full of humor. He laughs at himself, he laughs at his family, he laughs with you. It's just charming. And because of that, here you have the greatness of the consciousness. You have all these miracles. You have this beautiful universal consciousness. But in the end, it comes down to someone who's so approachable, so close. You feel him as you go through and read through that book, as you go through the pages. You begin to feel him as your own personal friend, as God incarnated in a form that you can relate to. And so that vibration of being so vastly expanded and so wonderfully, charmingly personal and filled with love, those two together, as people read that book, their lives are changed, their consciousness is changed. And it happened in Swamiji's life. It happened in my life. It happened in Deviji's life, and the lives of many, many of you sitting in this room. But it happened in the lives of millions of people. People who are well known, people who are obscure. You may know that it was Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, and one of the great business minds of the century. It was the only book that he kept on his iPad, and he read it every year. And at his funeral, he gave away 500 copies. That was his final gift to his friends and loved ones. Of all the things that he could have given, he gave that, because that's what had touched him and changed him. And so that great, great scripture, the modern scripture of the Autobiography of a Yogi, not only has changed the lives of millions already, but it is destined to go on and on and on, changing lives. And tonight we're talking about it because now available here will be the Autobiography of the Yogi in Hindi, and soon in Tamil and Marathi and many, many other languages that are here in India, but languages all around the world. It will be translated and put into languages so everyone in the world can read that wonderful scripture and have that vibration enter their minds and enter their hearts and change their lives.
I also want to thank all the children and the people who were involved with the play. And I wanted to share a little interesting story that I read recently. They were excavating in Italy an old church happened to be in the town of Gubbio in Italy. And underneath the altar, they found the skeleton of a huge dog. That's what they thought. And then they all said, no, no. And they realized that's where the wolf of Gubbio had been buried, under the altar of the church. And they found his remains there. So it's a beautiful story, and really one might say symbolic, how a great saint could transform some creature that was filled with hatred and violence, transform him into a consciousness that people at the end revered and buried him under the altar. But we're talking tonight about Autobiography of a Yogi. And it's a difficult book to talk about because it isn't really a book. It's more than a book. It's a living reality that speaks to us in a different manner each time we read it. One of Master's disciples called him a flawless mirror, that he would always reflect back to the disciple their own state of consciousness. And so if you pick up the autobiography and you're in an indifferent state of mind or in a restless state of mind, you may not get much out of it. But if you pick it up with devotion, with a sense of yearning and longing, then that book will speak to you. Then no matter how many times I read it, I always find, and it's the exact same copy, I always find a chapter I didn't read before. The chapter was always there, but I wasn't aware enough to tune into it. So it's a living reality that has been given to our age. And Master takes so many of the common questions and themes that every human being faces and talks about them on different levels. He talks about life and death, starting out at the beginning with the loss of his mother when he was 12 years old, who he loved so dearly, and the great grief and void it left in his life. And this is something that as human beings we all have to deal with, death and loss. And how Master finally, after years, was able to be comforted. But then he also takes death and brings it to a much higher plane. When Sri Yukteswar, when he was a young man at his guru's feet, Lahiri Mahashaya, his dear friend Rama died. And Sri Yukteswar said, it was an interesting story, I won't go through it all if you've read it, but Sri Yukteswar raised Rama from the dead. And he started to say, well, what is life? What is death? If these men of God can bring it to such a high level that there is no death. And Master at one time he was watching, he was having an experience of meditating in his attic room in Forgarpa Road in Kolkata. And then all of a sudden he felt himself in the body of a ship captain during World War I. And the ship, a big bomb came and hit the ship, and the crew jumped overboard. They were swimming for their lives. And finally he got to the shore, and he thought, oh, I'm alive. And then a bullet hit him, and he fell down dead. And then the next minute, he was back in his body in Calcutta. And then he prayed to God, Lord, am I alive or am I dead? And he heard the divine voice saying, it's all light and shadows. What has life and death do? It has nothing to do with light. And so Master takes us on a journey where things we can relate to very poignantly on a human level. And he shows us the highest explanation of them. Also with living in this world, he presents his parents as ideal householders, the Dharmic parents living a life of self-renunciation and service to the world, service to their family. And you think, oh, that's the highest ideal. But then he takes it to the next level. And he talks about Layuri Mahashaya, who when his wife came and said, why don't you provide for the family? He dematerialized. And he said, woman, I am nothing. How can a nothing like me provide for you? And so Master's always opening up the doors to show us the highest level. He talks about many, many great saints. In fact, the original title, did you know, of Autobiography of a Yogi was not that, but it was Yogi Christs of East and West. That was the original title. But then he wanted to make it broader, so he called it Autobiography of a Yogi, which was wise. But he talks about many, many great saints of East and West. But then he talks about his guru, and that's on a whole other level, because we can go to many saints, we can draw inspiration, but the guru-disciple relationship is on a plane all of its own. The relationship, there are many great saints. We can go to them. Master went to them and drew great inspiration, but his relationship with Sri Teshwara was unique. And so it is, he shows us there are many men and women of God, and once we find our guru, that is our channel. It is our channel for liberation. And so I could go on and speak of many, many different themes that Master developed in Autobiography of a Yogi. But suffice it to say that any question you have in your personal life, about the nature of truth and reality, you will find the answer there in the highest possible expression. If you read it with devotion, if you read it with openness. And now we are bringing out this Hindi edition. Such a great joy. I always feel, unnecessarily perhaps, but I feel a little guilty that Master had to leave India and come to the West. And you know, when you read about Master's all the lectures he gave during those 26 years, so often he talked about India, and you knew that his heart was always here. And that's part of the reason I'm so glad that I can return. I thought, well, if he can come to the West and teach, I will return the favor, and I will come to India and share his teachings. But not that I am on his level, please understand, but I feel if I can do a little bit to make up for all the sacrifices that he made coming to the West. And when Master, you know, his last words, his very last words before he left the body, he said, he was reading his poem, My India. And the last lines are where Ganges, woods, Himalayan caves, and men breathe God. I am hallowed, my body touched that sod. And on the word sod, his breath became a sigh, and he left the body. He was at a big public talk. He just fell to the floor. Swami Kriyananda was there at that moment, and as you know, he describes it in his autobiography, The New Path. But even his last words were of his beloved mother India. And so now for the autobiography to come out, now in Hindi, and many other translations are in the works. It is I'm sure he is so happy that in the land of his birth, that he so treasured and so revered, that his vibrations can now come through the channel of Autobiography of a Yogi. So it's actually quite a significant event that this book is coming out. And I think it will be, if you look at the life and work of the great masters, everything they did had a significance, a higher spiritual purpose. And I think now that this is the fulfillment of Yogananda writing that book, which came out first in English in 1946. I was born but a few months after that book came out. I like to think Master was saying, all right, I'm giving you my word, are you coming? And many of us who started Ananda were born in 46, and we came right after the book was released. So now, in 2017, it comes out again, but in the language of, one of the languages of his own people. So it is a great, great thing that this is happening.